Hi again. John Wesley Bready on the abolition of slavery is noting how reluctantly the evangelicals of America embraced the spirit that had obviously dominated British evangelicalism for 2 generations already since John Wesley. The spirit that led it to move towards the abolition of slavery by propaganda. And that some of that propaganda had circulated not only in Great Britain, but had come across to America even in the days of John Wesley and Francis Asbury, his great disciple in America. But it hadn't had the same impact in America, and we just spent the last segment, or at least Bready did, musing on why that was and all of the different conditions that maintained in America that did not in Britain by this time. And now we do know that the triumph of abolition was just around the corner. So what changed things? Bready goes on, nevertheless, despite all the difficulties and disappointments confronting American abolitionists, the tireless pressure of the Christian conscience finally prevailed. For increasingly it was felt by truly religious people that where the Spirit of Christ is, there must be outward and visible, as well as inward and invisible liberty. In 1823, for instance, when the slave interests were trying to foist their institution on Illinois, at one meeting of the Friends of Freedom in St. Clair County, more than 30 preachers of the gospel attended and opposed the introduction of slavery into the state. The pulpit, says a contemporary, thundered anathemas against the introduction of slavery. The religious community coupled freedom and Christianity, which was one of the most powerful levers used in the contest. The clergy of Illinois, says the biographer of Governor Coles, were almost without exception opposed to the convention which favored the making it a slave state. And they exerted great influence in securing the rejection at the polls. It was shortly after his return from the first of his 3 visits to England that William Lloyd Garrison, following the British evangelical example, founded in 1833 the American Anti-Slavery Society. And if, in the ardor of his crusade, he was at times to grow weary and of ecclesiastical prudence and compromise, there can be no doubt but that it was a simple evangelical faith which upheld and sustained him. "I call upon the spirits of the just made perfect in heaven," cried Garrison in 1832, "upon all who have experienced the love of God in their souls here below, upon the Christian converts in India and the Isles of the Sea, to sustain one in the assertion that there is power enough in the religion of Jesus Christ to melt down the most stubborn prejudices, to overthrow the highest wall of partition, to break the strongest caste, to improve and elevate the most degraded, and to equalize all its recipients." End of quote. Garrison's appeal is here more explicitly directed to Christians than was Wesley's appeal in his thoughts upon slavery 58 years earlier. And this fact marks a pronounced Christian advance. Again, when we come to the execrable fugitive slave law of 1850, the tremendous defiance of that great preacher, Henry Ward Beecher, is suggestive of the rising tide of righteous wrath which everywhere outside the slave-ridden areas was possessing the mind of American evangelical Protestantism. "But as for those provisions," protested Beecher, "which concern aid to fugitives, may God do so to us, yes, and more also, if we do not spurn them as we would any other mandate of Satan. If in God's providence fugitives ask bread or shelter, raiment or conveyance at my hands, my own children shall lack bread, ere they, my own flesh shall sting with cold, ere they shall lack clothing. And whatsoever defense I would put forth for my own children, that shall these poor, despised, persecuted creatures have at my hands and upon the road. The man who would do otherwise, who would obey this law to the peril of his soul and the loss of his manhood, were he brother, son, or father, shall never pollute my hand with grasp of hideous friendship, nor cast his swarthy shadow across my threshold." Little wonder that Lincoln pondered Beecher's sermons, and what need be said more? That most effective of all novels, Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin, first published serially in 1851, was no art for art's sake production. Rather, it was a creative evangelical treatise exposing the incompatibility of slavery and Christianity. The same may be said of Whittier's numerous anti-slavery poems. What Cowper was to the Negro's cause in England, that later was Whittier to the Negro's cause in America. As for Lincoln, there is no understanding his life apart from the standards of vital Christianity, which the evangelical awakening had diffused throughout the English-speaking world. The first influences which molded his boyish mind were his mother's scripture reading and her simple piety, together with the occasional ministrations of itinerant preachers, which he never failed to attend, despite the mud, slush, or snow of frontier trails. The Bible, throughout life, remained to Lincoln the book of books. Always was it on his presidential desk. Daily he perused its pages. His spiritual outlook was formed and colored by it. His great heart was warmed by its prophetic utterance. His tender sympathies were kindled at its sacred fires. And who would deny that the clear, tense, glowing imagery of his speech derived from this intimacy with Holy Writ? Lincoln, indirectly, was as much a product of the revival's impact in America as was Wilberforce directly of its impact in England. Britain's abolition of the slave trade in 1807 and her Emancipation Act of 1833, together with Lincoln's Proclamation of Emancipation on January 1st, 1863, and the 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution, 1865, outlawing all slavery within the Union, forecast the end of modern slavery. With these epical victories, the doom of the dehumanizing institution was sealed, for they proved both the foundation and the Magna Carta of innumerable liberating movements ahead. Yet the sorry fact that now, under totalitarian dictatorships, this is about 1940, this mocking monster can again rear its head and show its poisoned fangs, betokens the tragic tenacity of man's inhumanity to man. It demonstrates challengingly that constant vigilance is the price of progress, that faith is the guardian of liberty. And so ends the chapter on the abolition of slavery. Next, in chapter 14, parallel creative victories. I'll put in a link to Dorothy Sayers' great work on the brink and into World War II, when she saw in her book Creed or Chaos that all of these freedoms that were gained in the century or 2 centuries before World War II could be lost very easily. So Dorothy Sayers' book Creed or Chaos, the first video on your screen, and also the playlist.